The phone call came in just before sunrise. The kind of early morning that feels too dark to be called dawn, but too light to be night. I had been on the job long enough that mornings like this didn't catch me off guard. I'd long learnt to push through the fatigue, the smell, the sight, but this case had lingered. Something about it gnawed at me in a way I hadn't prepared for. My name is Kyle Graves. I've been in the biohazard cleanup business for 15 years, specializing in decomposition. I've handled countless scenes, murders, suicides, accidents that never made it to the news. I've scrubbed floors so soaked in blood they couldn't be saved, disinfected walls that held the memory of someone's last breath. You name it, I've seen it, and I've cleaned it. But that morning, that job, it stayed with me in ways I still can't explain. The phone buzzed in my pocket, the sharp sound slicing through the stillness of the room. I didn't bother checking the number. It was early. In my line of work, those calls never come with good news, I answered. Graves, I said, my voice hoarse from a night of restless sleep. Yeah, it's Parker from the sheriff's department. The voice on the other end said, we've got a scene. A house in the outskirts of town. Need you out here by 8. I could hear the weight in his voice. Parker wasn't one to get emotional, but he didn't sound steady either. Something was off. Condition? I asked, my mind already going through the mental checklist of supplies. Advanced, he said. There was a long pause before he added, bedrooms sealed. Bring extra filters. That was all. No details. I hung up, staring at the phone in my hand. I had been called out to advanced scenes before. Bodies left to decompose in closed spaces for weeks, months. The smell, the mess, the fluids. The work was never easy, but it was predictable. And yet, something about Parker's voice lingered in my ears, and the dread that followed me like a shadow only grew as I prepped my gear. I grabbed my respirator and checked the filters. Always 2 pairs, Tyvek suits, industrial strength cleaners, biohazard bags, a carpet extractor. It was like an instinct. No, grab what I needed. Get to work. Don't think too much. Every time you overthink it, you lose control. I didn't know it then, but I wasn't just preparing for a cleanup. I was preparing for something that would shake me in ways I couldn't anticipate. The house wasn't far, just outside the main town on a quiet road that ran along the outskirts. I'd been in these parts before, but this neighborhood was different. Quiet. Almost too quiet. The houses were isolated, sitting far back from the road, framed by thick trees and untamed brush. I could feel the stillness in the air as I drove down the gravel road, the trees casting long dark shadows that made the light of day seem dimmer than it should have been. When I pulled up, the house stood in front of me, looking ordinary. A single-story ranch, pale yellow with a sagging porch and a lawn that had seen better days. The kind of place where nothing stood out, where the neighbors were used to the quiet and the isolation. I parked, grabbed my gear, and stepped out into the humid air. It hit me immediately heavy, thick with the promise of heat. It was the kind of morning where the air felt like it was already suffocating, as if the day had already decided it was too hot to move. The sheriff's car was parked out front, the engine running, but there was no sign of movement. Parker stood by the front door, arms crossed, his face drawn tight. He didn't greet me, didn't wave. He just stared at me as I approached, his eyes heavy with something unspoken. Come on, he said, his voice low, almost gravelly. You're going to want to see this yourself. I nodded, following him up the cracked concrete steps and toward the door. The seal across the doorframe was fresh, the bright orange strip of evidence tape still intact. Parker didn't say anything, just opened the door. The moment I stepped inside, the air hit me like a wall. It wasn't just the heat, it was the smell, the unmistakable odor of decomposition, that sharp sour sweetness that clung to your skin and made your stomach churn. But underneath it, there was something else, a chemical scent. Faint, but noticeable. My first instinct was to reach for my respirator, but I resisted. I wanted to breathe it in for a second. Let the air tell me what kind of scene I was walking into. We passed through the living room. It was pristine. Too pristine. The kind of sterile, unnatural cleanliness you only find in places untouched by life. A stack of unopened mail sat on the coffee table. The furniture was perfectly arranged, as if no one had lived here in weeks. The silence in the house was unnatural. It wasn't just quiet, it was oppressive, like the air itself had been waiting for something. Parker didn't speak, but I could feel his tension. He led me down a narrow hallway toward the bedroom at the back of the house. As we walked, the smell grew stronger, but not from the bedroom, from the floor. The closer we got to the door, the more the air thickened, as if something had been soaking into the very wood of the house. Something trapped. I stopped before we reached the door, a chill running down my spine. Something didn't feel right. "Everything okay?" Parker asked, his voice almost too casual. I didn't answer, I just nodded, stepping forward, trying to shake off the unease. We reached the door. The bedroom was sealed tight, the tape still in place. The room was warm, almost unnaturally so, the air thick with humidity. I reached for my respirator and sealed it around my neck, making sure it was secure. "Here goes," I muttered. I carefully peeled the tape from the doorframe. The air inside rushed out as the seal broke, the smell of decay filling my nostrils in an instant. It was stronger here, unbearable, clinging to everything. I stepped in. At first glance, the room looked ordinary. A bed against the wall, a dresser, a nightstand with a lamp, everything in its place. But as my eyes drifted toward the body, I felt it. That cold, unnatural stillness. The woman, her body was lying on her back, arms crossed over her chest. She looked peaceful, but something was wrong. I couldn't place it at first. The skin, the way it had started to darken, to pull tight. The bloating in her abdomen, the fluids had soaked into the mattress, staining it a dark, irregular black. But it wasn't the body that unsettled me. It was everything else. The room, It felt wrong. The furniture was pristine, undisturbed. There was no sign of the chaos that usually accompanies a death scene. No overturned items. No signs of struggle. It was as if the room had been locked away, untouched, for weeks. I stepped closer, examining the body. The skin was marbled, sloughing off in places, but her hands were clean. Too clean. The nails no dirt, no residue, just perfectly manicured, as if she had been lying there undisturbed for days. Weeks. I felt the hair on my neck stand up. This wasn't just a death. This wasn't just a cleanup. There was something more, something off, something I couldn't quite understand yet. I took a slow, deep breath, trying to steady myself. I was here to work, not to question, but the questions were already bubbling to the surface. "What had happened here, Parker?" I said, my voice low. "What is this?" He didn't answer immediately, just stood by the door, arms crossed, his face unreadable. Then, he muttered, almost to himself, "You're going to need to take a good look at the floor." That was when I saw it. The patch of carpet, right at the foot of the bed. It was different, clean, not just cleaner, but untouched, as if nothing had ever touched it. No wear, no stains, no sign of anything. I crouched down, running my gloved hand over the fibers. They felt strange, smooth, slick, like something had been applied to them. Parker's voice came again, softer this time. "It was warm when we found her. The spot in the carpet, warm, even though the rest of the room was sealed off." I looked up at him. The words hung heavy in the air. Warm. The thought stuck in my head as I moved closer to the carpet. This wasn't just decay. Something else had happened here, something that didn't belong. And that's when I realized. This wasn't a cleanup. This was a puzzle. One I was about to step into, and one I might not be able to solve. I crouched low, inspecting the carpet patch more closely. The fibers, once soft and pliable, now stood unnaturally still, almost as if they were resisting touch. As I ran my gloved fingers over the surface, I felt it against something strange. A slickness, not wet, but smooth, like a thin layer of something had been applied over the carpet, something that clung to the fibers without leaving a residue. The chemical smell was stronger now, sharp, almost metallic. It cut through the rancid scent of decomposition like a knife through meat. I pulled out my UV flashlight and passed it over the carpet. The fibers reacted almost immediately, glowing faintly, not like decay, but like something intentionally placed. The glow was uniform, too perfect. Not the uneven fluorescence you'd get from organic matter, but something more deliberate, something manufactured. I could almost feel the air growing heavier around me, as the weight of that realization sank in. Parker stood silent, his back to the doorframe. His arms were crossed tightly over his chest, his posture rigid. He hadn't moved since we entered the room, and the tension in his body was palpable. I glanced up at him, but his face remained unreadable, like he'd seen this all before. But I could feel it, the same thing that gnawed at me in the back of my mind, deep in my gut. Something wasn't right here. "Parker," I said, my voice quieter this time, as if speaking louder might break something fragile. "What is this? What happened here?" He didn't answer immediately, just shifted his weight, his eyes fixed on the floor. Then, slowly, he spoke. "We don't know, Kyle. That's the thing." He paused, looking at the patch of carpet. "The lab's still working on it, but it's not natural. The warmth we felt, it shouldn't have been there, not after so many days. And the smell, it's not what you think it is. It's like something was controlling it. like something changed it. I swallowed hard. A sinking feeling pressed at the pit of my stomach. I'd been on enough jobs to know when someone wasn't telling the full truth, but I also knew when something was outside my expertise. I'd been trained to handle the biological aftermath of death, but whatever was happening in this room, it wasn't following any of the rules I'd learned. I stepped back, surveying the room. The clean lines of the room felt wrong and naturally preserved. The furniture was too neat, the photo frames too spotless. There was no sign of the typical chaos you'd expect in a room left untouched by the world for weeks. No dust on the dressers. No signs of the body's decay spreading. It was like the room had been frozen in time, waiting for something to happen. My eyes flicked back to the body, but even she felt out of place. Her crossed arms, the way she was positioned, the skin on her face tight, almost waxy, didn't belong. There was no sign of the usual chaos that comes with a body left too long in heat. No broken down muscle tissue. No tearing of skin or deflation of limbs. Her lower legs, in particular, had an unnatural preservation to them, slightly firmer, less bloated, as if they had been shielded from the worst of the decay. I closed my eyes for a second, trying to focus. There was a low hum in my head, like something deep inside my brain was trying to make a connection, but the pieces wouldn't come together. I reached for my kit, new gloves, disinfectant, and a small air scrubber, but even as I began setting things up, my mind kept coming back to the same question. Why was it so controlled? This didn't feel like a natural death, and it certainly didn't feel like a typical decomposition. The warmth of the floor under that strange patch of carpet wasn't fading. I knelt down again, carefully lifting a corner of the carpeting. I almost didn't want to touch it, but the nagging curiosity in my chest wouldn't let me stop. The fibers pulled away easily, almost too easily, like the carpet had been recently replaced. Beneath it, the padding was untouched, dry, immaculate. The air around it felt thick, like something had been sealed under the floorboards, waiting. The temperature shift wasn't just noticeable, it was undeniable. "Parker," I whispered, not looking up. "This isn't just some random accident. Someone was here before, after, her." He shifted uncomfortably. "You think someone planted that spot?" He didn't wait for my answer. "We don't have the lab results back yet," but his voice trailed off. He knew what I was getting at. We both knew that nothing about this scene was random. Not the pristine carpet, not the temperature differential, not the strange chemical scent hanging in the air. I stood up and began marking the perimeter of the room with plastic sheeting. I had to keep myself busy, focused on the task at hand. I wasn't going to let the horror of the scene overwhelm me, not yet. But the more I moved around, the more I noticed things I hadn't seen before. The way the dust hung in the air, still, unmoving. The lack of any sounds, no ticking clocks, no creaks of the house settling, no faint hum from the refrigerator in the kitchen. It was as if the house had been locked in stasis. The silence was thick, suffocating. As I moved to the far side of the room, my gaze landed on the dresser. It was perfectly aligned against the wall, the drawers tightly shut, but there was something about the wood, something off. I walked over and ran my hand across the surface. The smoothness of it felt wrong. It was too new, too flawless. I tried the drawers one by one, each of them fitting snugly in their tracks, offering no resistance. When I reached the bottom drawer, I found it slightly ajar. I tugged it open. Inside there was a small stack of papers, old letters, some of them yellowed at the edges, but untouched by dust. I pulled one out and held it up to the light. The handwriting was neat, elegant, a script that seemed too formal for someone who had lived here. But that was nothing compared to what I saw at the bottom of the stack. A photograph, one that didn't belong. I stared at it for a moment, my heart beginning to race. The photo was black and white, worn at the corners, depicting a woman who looked strikingly similar to the body on the bed. But this woman wasn't old. As she was now, she looked young, maybe in her early 20s. There was a strange energy in the photo, a kind of serenity mixed with something darker. Like she was staring into something she knew was coming. I stared at it for a long time, turning it over in my hand. On the back was a single word, written in the same elegant handwriting. Still, I couldn't place it at first, but it stuck with me, gnawing at my mind. What did it mean? What was still? And why had it been kept hidden in a drawer, away from the rest of the world? I stood there for a moment, turning the photo over and over in my hand, trying to piece it together, but it felt like the walls of the room were closing in on me. And the more I tried to focus, the more the shadows around me seemed to darken. "Parker," I called out, my voice trembling. "There's something off. This woman," but before I could finish, I heard it, a faint sound, a rustling. It came from behind the walls. The air shifted in the room, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood at attention. I froze, the photo still gripped tightly in my hand. The rustling came again, this time louder. I knew it wasn't the house settling. This was something different, something purposeful. Parker, my voice caught in my throat, but when I turned around, he was gone. I hadn't heard him leave. Panic crept into my chest. I moved to the door, calling his name again, my voice rising in urgency. No answer. That's when I felt its unmistakable sense of being watched. A presence that had shifted in the room. So subtle, yet so undeniable. I swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how alone I was in that space. Alone with whatever was still there, still in the house. I turned back to the room, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I had to finish this job. I had to make the room safe, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the room wasn't just contaminated by decay. It was contaminated by something else. Something still waiting, something alive. I could feel the pulse of my own heartbeat now, as if the walls of the room were somehow closing in around me. The silence that had once been oppressive now felt suffocating, a weight pressing on my chest that seemed to grow with every passing second. The rustling sound behind the walls continued, slow and deliberate. It wasn't just the house settling. I knew that it was something else, something that shouldn't be here. Something that felt alive. I glanced around the room, my eyes scanning for any sign of movement, any indication of what was causing the noise. The stillness was overwhelming. Even the dust in the air hung motionless, as if everything in this room was frozen in time, caught in the same eerie web of silence. The warmth under the carpet was still there, lingering, just as the strange, metallic scent hadn't faded. It had only grown stronger, thicker in the air, like it had seeped into the very walls of the house, settling in with the decay. "Parker," I called out again, my voice shaking slightly. There was no answer. I stepped into the hallway, scanning the empty space, my footsteps muted on the old hardwood floor. The house felt like it was watching me, its eyes hidden behind the blank windows and the sealed doorways. I stepped back toward the bedroom, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. There was something so unnatural about the room now, as though whatever had been waiting for me was still there, lurking in the corners. The photo I had found in the dresser was still clenched in my hand. The word on the back still had etched itself into my brain. It was as though that word had a weight of its own, a significance that I couldn't understand but couldn't ignore. I ran my thumb over the edges of the photo again, staring at the woman's face. She looked like the body on the bed, only younger. Her eyes were dark, but there was something unsettling about them, something to calm, to knowing. I tried to focus, to push past the rising unease, to make sense of what I was seeing. But as I looked around, trying to ground myself in something normal, I realized Parker wasn't just gone, he'd vanished. There was no sign of him, no trace. It was like he'd never been there in the first place. My heart rate quickened. The air in the room felt thicker now, like something was pressing down on me. I took a step back into the bedroom, looking toward the bed where the body still lay, the body that had started this whole thing. The woman who had been left to decompose in this room for weeks. But it wasn't just the body I had to worry about anymore. It was everything else in the room, the stillness, the feeling that I wasn't alone, and the strange, inexplicable events that were piling up faster than I could keep track of. I walked toward the bed again, my eyes focused on the woman's body. She was so calm, but something about the way she lay there made me uneasy. The way her arms were crossed over her chest, the way her fingers were curled gently, as if she had been placed like that. Her skin had sloughed off in patches, revealing the bloating and discoloration that came with death. But even that wasn't enough to explain the feeling that something else had happened here, something that went beyond a natural decomposition process. I bent down closer, inspecting her face. Her features were tight, drawn as if the life had been sucked out of her, and yet there was no sign of the kind of decomposition I had grown used to seeing in my years on the job. The skin had pulled so tightly against her skull, it looked almost wax-like, unnatural. Her lips were slightly parted, but the odor wasn't the rank, sour smell of typical decomposition. Instead, it carried that chemical undertone again, the faint metallic sweetness that lingered on the edge of everything in the room. I leaned in closer, wondering if there was anything I had missed. That's when I noticed something. There beneath her fingernails, they weren't just clean, they were almost pristine, unnaturally pristine. There was no dirt, no grime, and the nail beds themselves were almost chalky, an unusual color, like they had been exposed to something that had altered the natural process of decomposition. I reached forward, my gloves brushing lightly against her skin, careful not to disturb the delicate preservation of her hands. As I pulled my hand back, a faint trail of dust, like fine powder, clung to my fingertips. I wiped it off on my suit, the unease growing heavier with each passing second. That was when I realized her nails, her skin, even the way she lay there. It wasn't just the decomposition that was out of place. It was the preservation. It wasn't just a body left to rot in a room. It was a body that had been ... treated, in some way I couldn't understand. This woman had been altered after death, and whatever had done that was still in this room. I turned to the window, my mind racing. Was it possible the house had been sealed for a reason? The room had felt warmer than it should have been, and the strange warmth under the carpet was still there, radiating from beneath the floorboards. I had seen nothing like this in my years of work. Bodies didn't decompose like this. People didn't preserve like this. The whole scene was ... wrong. There was something more here, something I wasn't trained for, something that didn't fit. My eyes caught the corner of the room, where the dresser stood. That strange scuff mark on the floor had caught my attention earlier, and now it called to me again. I walked over to the spot, the soft whisper of my Tyvek suit moving with each step. The mark wasn't deep, just a faint groove in the floorboards, but it was there, as if something had been dragged across it. I knelt down, running my fingers along the wood. The grain felt ... wrong. Too smooth, too new. I lifted the dresser slightly, just enough to peek underneath, and there it was, a small metallic object glinting in the dim light. I reached for it, my pulse hammering in my throat as I pulled it out from under the dresser. It was a tiny vial, the size of a thumb, and the liquid inside shimmered faintly. The label had been worn away, but I could make out a few words written in faded ink. Preservative. Handle with care. The word preservative made my skin crawl. My hand trembled as I turned it over, considering the implications. Whoever had been in this room, whoever had set this scene, had used something to alter the body, to keep it from decaying at the natural rate. But why go through all that trouble? And what had happened to Parker? I looked back at the door. The house was too quiet now, too still. I could feel the weight of every moment as I stood there, looking around the room. The photo, the vial, the strange preservation of the body, none of it made sense. But there was one thing I was sure of. Whoever or whatever had been in this room was still here, still waiting, and I was no longer sure I wanted to know what was waiting for me next. The room felt like it was closing in on me, pressing down with a weight that was both physical and psychological. The vial, the chemical preservation, the unnatural stillness, it was all adding up to something darker than I had anticipated. The familiar world of decomposition had morphed into a nightmare I couldn't escape, and yet, the sense of urgency pushed me forward. I couldn't stand still, not anymore. I needed to understand what was happening, but the more I tried to rationalize it, the less it made sense. I slipped the vial into the pocket of my Tyvek suit, hoping to get it back to the lab later. Maybe they could make sense of it. Maybe they could explain why this room felt like it had been a laboratory for some twisted experiment. I couldn't help but feel a prickle of dread crawl down my spine as I moved back toward the bed. I had to see it again. The body, the way it was positioned, the skin, the nails, the unnatural preservation. It haunted me. But it wasn't just her. It was everything. The stillness, the way the room seemed to hold its breath. It felt like I wasn't the only one there, like there was something watching, waiting. I crouched down near the bed, taking in the details again. Her arms were still crossed gently over her abdomen, fingers curled with an almost serene composure. Too serene. It didn't fit with the damage her body had suffered. Not just decay, but something else, something far worse. I reached out again, this time gingerly brushing my fingertips over her hands. There was no sign of rigor mortis, no stiffness. Her body was limp, unnaturally so, as though it had been relaxed in a state of preservation for longer than it should have been. The body was cold, but not the usual kind of cold you'd expect from a body left to decompose for weeks. This cold was deeper, almost as if the chill ran through her very bones, held in place by something far more sinister than natural causes. My mind raced with possibilities, each more absurd than the last. Had she been kept alive, in some twisted way? Had she been part of something far darker than I could imagine? The photograph, the preserved nails, none of it fit the story I knew. And still, the rustling behind the walls continued. Soft, slow. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It felt like a rhythm, something deliberate, something in time with my pulse. It was there, underneath everything. That sound, that presence. I couldn't explain it. I didn't want to. I stood up abruptly, the feeling of being watched growing stronger. I needed to move. I needed to find Parker. Whatever had been happening here, it wasn't just confined to the room. I could feel it spreading, like an infection creeping through the house. If I stayed too long, I might become part of the pattern, part of whatever was waiting for me in the walls. I moved out of the bedroom, the soft rustling behind me following like a shadow. It was impossible to ignore now, the sound clear, intentional. I stepped into the hallway, scanning the dim light of the house. It was eerily quiet. The walls seemed to hum with a kind of tension, as though they were holding something back. I turned the corner into the kitchen, the door slightly ajar. The air in there was stale. Still, I stepped in, moving cautiously, my boots making barely a sound on the cracked linoleum. The kitchen looked like it hadn't been touched in weeks. There were dishes stacked in the sink, but nothing had been disturbed. The refrigerator door hung slightly open, but the contents had long since spoiled, and then I heard it, a sharp, clear sound, like glass breaking. I froze, every muscle in my body locking up. I turned slowly toward the source, my heart thundering in my chest. There, just behind the kitchen counter, a small clear glass vial lay on the floor, shattered. The liquid that had been inside it had spilled across the floor, but it wasn't the liquid that made my stomach drop, it was the shape of the vial, the shape of the object that had once been contained inside it. The liquid wasn't just spilled, it was thick, viscous, a deep dark red. But it didn't reflect light in the way liquid should. It glimmered faintly, almost as if it were alive. Alive. The thought clung to my mind like a curse, refusing to leave. What the hell had happened here? I reached down to pick up a shard of glass, the sharp edge biting into my gloved fingers. My breath was shallow now, panic starting to rise. The rest of the kitchen was quiet again, the moment suspended in a strange kind of limbo. And then I heard it again, the rustling, louder this time. It wasn't coming from the walls anymore, it was coming from the floor beneath my feet. I looked down, the floorboards were beginning to shift, slowly, as if something was pushing from beneath, forcing the wood to buckle. I felt the floor warm beneath me, the heat spreading up my legs. The floor was alive, it was moving. I stumbled back, my heart racing, my thoughts scrambled, but nothing connected, nothing made sense. The rustling sound became louder, now almost deafening, like 1,000 whispers. Like something was scratching at the very fabric of reality. I backed into the refrigerator, my chest tight, my breathing shallow, and then, the walls gave way. A long, deep crack ran from the floor to the ceiling in the far corner of the room, splintering the plaster like a gunshot in the dead silence of the house. The crack widened, and for the briefest moment, I saw it, a face, pale, contorted, and wide-eyed, the face of a man, frozen in terror, half buried in the wall as if it had been there for years. His mouth was open, a scream locked inside him, but his eyes, they were staring directly at me. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I could only move, instinctively, stumbling backward toward the front door. My mind was reeling. The face, the sound, the presence that seemed to fill every inch of the house. I knew that whatever had been lurking here was not a simple story of death. This wasn't about decomposition. It was about something far more ancient, more alive than I could fathom. I grabbed the door handle, yanked it open, and stumbled out into the morning air. The heat of the day hit me like a physical blow, but it was nothing compared to what I had just witnessed. The rustling, the warmth and the floor, the face and the wall, and then he was standing there, staring at me, his eyes wide, unblinking, as if he had been waiting for me. "You saw it too, didn't you?" he asked, his voice cold. There was something in it, something dark, something I hadn't heard before. I couldn't speak. I just nodded. "Good," Parker said softly, "because now we can't leave." I stood frozen in place, my mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. The man's face, half buried in the wall, the eyes wide open, staring at me with a terror that seemed so alive that I could almost feel it seeping into my own skin. The very presence of the face, trapped in that cracked plaster, was enough to pull the air from my lungs. I couldn't look away, couldn't breathe, as if the walls themselves had conspired to keep me in this nightmare. Then, Parker's voice broke through my daze, sharp and cold, like a slap. "You saw it too, didn't you?" His words weren't a question anymore, they were a statement, a dark, inevitable truth that I couldn't escape. He wasn't asking for reassurance, he was asking because he already knew. I could barely nod. My body moved on its own, backed away from the door, but the picture in my head wouldn't leave. The man's face still lingered, his wide, hollow eyes searing themselves into the fabric of my memory. It was impossible to deny whatever was happening in this house wasn't just an isolated incident. This was something wrong. Something that stretched far beyond death and decomposition. The sound, the rustling I'd heard before, grew louder now, louder than anything I'd ever encountered on a job. It wasn't just the floor, it wasn't just the walls, it was everywhere, it was inside me. It felt like the house itself was alive, breathing, waiting for me to understand. I turned away from the door, eyes locking with Parker's, and that's when I saw his face. His eyes weren't the same anymore. They were darker, sunken, as though the weight of something was bearing down on him. He stood there, waiting, like he knew this moment would come. Like he had been waiting for me to reach this point, for me to see. His voice was quieter now, like he was sharing a secret, but I could hear the strain in his words. I told you this place wasn't like the others. You don't just walk into a house like this and leave. It doesn't let you. The air felt thick as I tried to process what he was saying. This wasn't just a biohazard job. It wasn't about cleaning up death anymore. This house, this room had become something more, something alive, and it wanted something from us. I took a step back, my boots scraping against the floor. The warmth beneath the boards was still there, spreading through my legs, pulling me closer to the ground. I had to get out. I had to leave. But every part of me knew that leaving wasn't an option. Not anymore. What happened to you? I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Parker didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a slow step forward, his hands shaking as he pulled a small object from his pocket. A vial, the same kind I had found in the kitchen, shattered on the floor, but this one was intact, sealed tight. He held it out to me, and I could see the dark liquid swirling inside. Something that shimmered faintly, almost as though it was alive, moving. This, Parker said, his voice low, almost reverent, is why we're here. I felt my pulse quicken. What the hell is it? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he held my gaze, his face hardening with the weight of something far darker than I was ready to accept. It's not just a chemical, he said. It's part of the process, the preservation process. The room, the body, the face, and the wallets, all part of it. Whatever happened here wasn't natural. And it wasn't just one person. My heart started pounding in my chest as the pieces began to click into place. The preserved body, the warmth in the floor, the chemical smell that wouldn't go away. It wasn't about the person who had died here. It wasn't about the decomposition. It was about something else entirely. Something far older, more methodical, more intentional. It wasn't just her, was it? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Parker nodded. No, and it's not just the woman in the room. There's more, much more. This house, it's been used. A place to trap something. To hold something. I stared at him, the fear beginning to tighten my chest. Hold something? What are you talking about? His expression darkened, and for a moment I saw something flash across his eyes. Guilt, fear, regret. It was gone as quickly as it had come, replaced by a look of determination. Whatever was done here, it didn't just stop with her. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. She was just the first. I stepped back again, trying to process the words. My body was still moving on autopilot, the weight of the conversation sinking in. But there was something else, something gnawing at the back of my mind, a nagging feeling that kept pulling me back to the walls, to the face. The face, I whispered, looking toward the cracked plaster. How long has it been there? Parker looked at the wall for a long moment, as if measuring the right answer. Then he spoke, voice thick with what sounded like old pain. The face has always been there. It's been watching, waiting. I shuddered. What are you talking about? Who is that? What is that? Parker took a deep breath, his eyes closing briefly as if steeling himself. When he opened them again, there was something raw in his gaze. The man in the wall. He was part of the process too. The vessel, Parker said. They used him, and now, they're using us. My blood ran cold. My instincts screamed at me to turn and run, to get out of the house and never look back. But I knew it was already too late. The house wasn't going to let us leave. It had already begun pulling us in. I turned my back on Parker and stepped toward the door, desperate to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the house. But the moment my hand touched the doorframe, I felt it. A sudden coldness swept over me, a sharp, biting chill that burned my skin like ice. It wasn't natural. It wasn't just the temperature was wrong. The air felt like it was closing in around me again, suffocating me with its presence. I turned back, but before I could even react, the door slammed shut on its own, a deafening sound that rang through the house. I was trapped. I spun around to find Parker standing motionless in the center of the room. His eyes were wide, his mouth slack as if he were in a trance. No, I whispered, but I couldn't get the words out. I took a step back, feeling the warmth rise beneath me. But this time it wasn't just warmth. It was alive, pressing against my legs, crawling up my body, as though something beneath the floorboards was reaching for me. I looked down and froze. From the crack in the floor, something was rising. Slowly, impossibly slow, but unmistakable. A hand, a pale, gnarled hand, emerging from beneath the boards like something ancient, something long dead, but still, alive. It reached for me. I couldn't move. My legs were locked in place, frozen in place by the sheer terror of what was unfolding in front of me. The hand, pale and twisted, emerged from the floorboards with excruciating slowness. Every inch of it felt like a violation of the natural order. The hand had fingers long and unnaturally thin, like claws scraping against the wood, dragging itself forward as though it had been waiting beneath the floor for years. I could see the tendons and veins stretching beneath the paper-thin skin, the joints bending in ways they shouldn't. The nail beds were stained a dark, sickly yellow, and the worst part, it wasn't just one hand. As I backed away, I saw the second hand push through, followed by the rest of the form, slowly rising from the floor like some grotesque marionette, strung together by strings of something unseen. I tried to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. I could barely breathe. Every instinct told me to run, but my body refused to obey. My eyes were glued to the grotesque figure as it began to drag itself fully out of the floor. The thing was humanoid sort of, but the proportions were wrong. Its legs were elongated, its torso stretched, too thin, too long, its skin a mottled, decaying gray. It was like a corpse that had been left to rot, then resurrected into something that shouldn't exist. The thing's head emerged from the wood last. Its face was hollow, a mass of bone and withered skin, half rotted, but still grotesquely alive. Its mouth hanging open, its teeth jagged and yellowed. I could feel its eyes on me, even though they were sunken deep into the skull, dark and empty. The air grew colder around me, the temperature dropping in seconds, and then it spoke, a low guttural sound that came from deep within its chest. The voice was hoarse, like the sound of scraping metal, and the words it formed were garbled and disjointed, as though it was struggling to speak after years of silence. Not leaving, it rasped. I stumbled back, my heart hammering against my ribs. I glanced at Parker, who was still standing motionless in the center of the room, his face frozen in a mask of horror. He wasn't even reacting. His body was rigid, locked in place, his expression distant, like he was lost. The thing's head turned toward Parker, its eyes locking on him, and for a moment, it felt like the entire house held its breath. Trap, the thing whispered, and its head tilted slightly, as if considering Parker. It made a sound, an eerie gurgling noise, as if it was trying to laugh, but the sound was too horrible to recognize as anything remotely human. I had to get out. I had to move. With everything inside me screaming to run, I tore my eyes away from the creature and sprinted toward the door. My hands fumbled at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The air felt thick, heavy. The door was sealed locked by something far more powerful than a simple latch. I pulled harder, but it wouldn't move. It was like the house itself was holding me inside. Behind me, I could hear the thing shifting, moving. The scraping of its claws against the floor, the low groan of wood bending beneath its weight. My breath was shallow, my chest tight with panic. I couldn't see the thing, but I could feel it. I could feel it coming for me. Then, I heard it again, the sound of Parker's voice. "We're not leaving." The words weren't his anymore, but it was his body, his mouth moving. He wasn't in control. Whatever had taken hold of him had fully consumed him. The horror I'd felt before, the unease at his strange behavior, it was all coming together. Parker wasn't Parker anymore. He was something else. My mind raced as I turned back, my body frozen in a moment of terrible realization. The creature was moving closer now, its gnarled, clawed hands dragging it forward, the floorboards warping beneath its weight. I could feel its presence, closing in, like a storm gathering strength, and then I saw it, the thing in the wall. Its empty eyes locked onto me again, and the air thickened with an unnatural pressure. The walls themselves seemed to pulse, to breathe with something unseen. "We can't leave." The thing's voice was louder now, closer. It felt like the house itself was speaking, each word soaked in malevolent intent. The rustling, the whispers from earlier, it all made sense now. The house had been alive for years, feeding off something it had trapped, trapping us. Parker's head jerked toward me, his eyes vacant. His mouth opened in a grotesque, exaggerated grin. The thing inside him was taking over, its hold tightening. "Don't go." I felt the heat under the floor again, stronger now, almost unbearable. Whatever was beneath it, whatever had been sealed inside, was stirring. It wasn't just the house that was alive anymore, it was everything inside it, and it was angry. It wanted to keep us here. Panic surged through me as I looked around. The walls felt closer now, pressing in, the air so thick I could barely breathe. The rustling intensified, becoming a cacophony of sound. as if the house itself was trying to swallow me whole. I glanced at the door again, but the handle was still immovable. I couldn't wait any longer. I turned back toward Parker, toward the creature that had taken hold of him. He wasn't standing. He was floating, just above the ground, his body suspended like a puppet with strings attached to nothing. The glow from the walls was almost blinding now, a sickly green that pulsed and shimmered in time with the unnatural rhythm of the creature. Then I saw it. The floor beneath me was buckling again, cracking open with a loud groan, revealing the source of the warmth that had been radiating through the room. The darkness below was vast and fathomable, but there was something more movement in the shadows, too fast, too deep to make out. The creature was already reaching for me. "You're part of it now," the thing hissed, and Parker's eyes flickered, returning for just a moment. I saw him, trapped, but still there beneath the thing controlling him. The man I knew gone. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't think. With every ounce of strength I pushed off the floor, throwing my shoulder against the door with all my weight. Nothing. Then, the door shuddered. It opened. The rush of air, cold and bitter, filled my lungs like a lifeline. But before I could take another step, a voice, faint, distant, whispered from behind me, "You can't leave." I didn't look back. The door swung open, but it wasn't enough. The weight of the house still pressed down on me, suffocating, and I couldn't escape its grip. My legs moved faster, but every step felt like I was wading through molasses, the air thick and oppressive. As I stumbled into the hallway, my eyes scanned the walls. The floor, every corner of the house felt alive now. I could feel it in my skin, in the air, in the breath of the house. I didn't know how much longer I had before whatever had taken hold of Parker, or whatever had taken hold of all of us, dragged me into the depths. I could feel the pulsating rhythm of the house, a heartbeat that wasn't human, but ancient. The same rustling, the same gnawing presence that had been following me since I first stepped through the door was now all around me, wrapping its invisible fingers around my throat. I reached for the front door, the last bastion of escape, but it wasn't just locked anymore. It was sealed. The darkness that filled the house wasn't just physical. It was something older, something rooted in the very bones of the place. The walls were closing in again, and I felt it in my chest. The pressure, the suffocation. My breath came out in ragged gasps. There was no way out, no way to outrun it. "You can't leave." I turned sharply toward the voice that seemed to come from nowhere. It was Parker's voice, no, not his. Something else. It was like the house itself had learned to speak through him. The words weren't just sounds, they were chains. Every syllable seemed to pull at the very air around me, at the space inside my lungs. I looked back, barely able to tear my eyes away from the door, to find Parker still suspended in the room, floating just above the floor, his eyes wide, empty. There was no sign of the man I knew, just the hollow shell of someone who had once been human. "I told you," Parker's voice rasped again, the words like poison in the air. "You can't leave. No one ever leaves." The walls shook slightly, as if the house was breathing again, deeper this time, faster. The very ground beneath my feet vibrated with it. A deep, low groan rumbled from somewhere beneath the floorboards, beneath everything. Something in the dark was awakening. I had to move, I had to get out. But as I turned back toward the door, the floor beneath me buckled again, sending a shockwave through the room. The house shifted, the foundations groaning as if the very building itself was stretching, reshaping, alive. And then, I saw it. The crack, the gap in the floor, the same crack where the thing had risen before. It was wider now, splitting further apart, revealing the depths beneath, a yawning, inky darkness that stretched farther than anything should. And there was the shape, a figure, something rising from the dark, not human, not even recognizable as alive, but unmistakably there. A wretched, skeletal thing wrapped in tattered rags, its limbs bending at unnatural angles, a face that had been chewed away by time and rot, and the eyes hollow and black, like the void itself, staring right at me. I froze. I knew it before it even moved. Whatever it was coming for me. The house wasn't just keeping me in, it was keeping something else out, and now, it was finally letting it out. The figure moved faster than I could comprehend. I turned toward the door again, but before I could reach for the handle, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Not Parker's, no. Something much colder, much darker. I jerked away, spinning around, ready to fight, but there was nothing there, just the empty hallway. The house had swallowed it up again, but the whisper, that voice, followed me. "Too late," it said, cold and low. "You can't outrun this." I rushed for the door again, my heart pounding in my chest. But now, as my hand gripped the handle, the floor shook. Not a simple vibration. It was violent, as though the entire house was fighting against me. The walls groaned, bending as if the structure itself was alive, angry at my intrusion, and then, the door slammed shut on its own, locked. I looked back to see Parker's figure, still suspended in midair, but now, he was moving, shifting, his body contorting as if something inside him was finally being set free. His arms jerked to unnatural angles, and his head lolled backward in a grotesque, sickening arch. The thing that had been controlling him was inside him. It was taking him, twisting him into something I couldn't recognize. Parker's mouth opened wide, but it wasn't his voice that came out. It was a screamer, raw, guttural cry that seemed to resonate from the walls themselves. The air around me became thick, suffocating with the pressure of what was happening. Then, I saw it. A shadow in the corner of the room, something moving in the dark. It wasn't just one thing, it was many. More hands, more faces, more limbs, pressing from the walls, as if they were being birthed from the house itself. Dozens of them, twisted and contorted, crawling toward me, reaching with long black fingers that seemed to bend in ways that shouldn't be possible. The rustling noise filled the room again, louder than ever. It was coming from everywhere, from the walls, from the floor, from the air. It was the house, feeding on me. It was alive, growing stronger, pulling everything toward it. The shadows moved faster, their outlines becoming more defined as they slithered toward me. I saw faces I couldn't recognize, faces of people that had been here long before me, their eyes wide open in silent screams. I didn't know how much longer I could stay standing. The pressure on my chest grew unbearable, like I was being crushed under the weight of the house itself. But I didn't have time to think. I didn't have time to do anything but run. I bolted for the door again, throwing my shoulder against it, trying to break through whatever invisible force held it shut. But then, something stopped me. A voice. It's over. I couldn't see where it came from, but I heard it as clear as day. The thing had spoken through the walls, through the house. It was waiting for me, and then, I felt it. The coldness of the house deepened, as if it were taking my breath away. The walls seemed to stretch, pulling everything toward the center of the room, toward me. I felt a pull, a tug, like my very essence was being drawn into the darkness beneath the floorboards. The house was claiming me. And with a final, desperate push, I hit the door again, harder this time. The pressure built, but this time, something gave. The door cracked. I didn't wait to see what was behind me. I ran. I didn't dare look back. I couldn't. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to escape whatever force was pulling at me, wrapping its tendrils around my very soul. The door cracked open just enough for me to squeeze through, but as I pushed against it, I felt a sudden violent resistance, a tug, like the house was reluctant to let me go. It wasn't just trying to hold me inside anymore. It was trying to drag me back. The pressure on my chest grew as I forced my way out into the hallway. I felt the floor beneath me shift again, groaning like the house was buckling under the weight of whatever was growing inside it. My body surged forward, my heart pounding in my throat, my breath ragged. Every step felt like a battle against the pull of the darkness. And I could hear it. I could feel it closing in around me like 1,000 invisible hands pushing at my back, urging me to fall into the abyss. I reached the front door, the daylight beyond it beckoning. But the moment my hand touched the doorknob, a sickening screech filled the air. I yanked my hand back, feeling a burn from the touch, as if the door itself had been scalding hot. But it was more than just the heat. It was like the door didn't want to be opened, like it was fighting me, keeping me from escaping. With no other choice, I turned and bolted for the windows. The glass was dirty, streaked with something I couldn't quite place, but the outside world was still visible. The trees, the distant road, the vague hope of freedom all just beyond reach. But before I could make it, the walls behind me groaned again. The sound was thick, like something ancient, something powerful, shifting and rearranging itself inside the house. The walls moved. I saw them warp, the surfaces bending outward and inward, as if the house was breathing, shifting, adapting to its own dark will. The windows, once clear, now felt distorted, like the space behind them was no longer the world I had once known. I tried to open the window, but it wouldn't budge. The lock had sealed itself shut, the frame fused with the wall, as though the house was trying to keep me inside, to keep me trapped with whatever had taken root here. I could feel my pulse pounding in my skull, my thoughts racing, but none of it made sense anymore. I was out of options. The house itself had become a prison, alive and aware, and the only thing I knew for certain was that I wasn't the one in control anymore. A noise came from behind me, a rustling, that same familiar sound that had been echoing through the house ever since I stepped inside. It was louder now, closer, more persistent. The walls were alive with it. the floor shifting beneath my feet as the sound pressed closer. I turned. The creature was in the hallway now, crawling toward me with impossibly long, jointed limbs. Its body was thin, too thin, and twisted, as though it had been broken and reshaped over and over again. The face was worse than I had ever imagined. Hollow eyes, sockets dark and empty, staring at me like a broken reflection. It wasn't just moving, it was growing, its limbs elongating, its skin stretching over its bones, as though it were feeding on the space, feeding on me. It wasn't just part of the house anymore, it was the house. Leave, the thing rasped, its voice hollow and deep. You are mine now. The walls around me groaned, and I felt it again, the pull. The house was sucking me in, feeding on my terror, feeding on my very essence. The windows I had tried to open, they were closing now, the air growing staler, thicker. The front door was no longer an escape, no longer an option. Everything was closing in on me. I ran toward the back of the house, my feet slipping on the wooden floors as I tried to outrun the shadows that seemed to stretch out in every direction. The house was shifting, warping, following me, chasing me down with a relentless hunger. The walls pushed out and in, the house expanding and contracting, growing like a living, breathing creature. The back door was ahead. I reached for it, but before I could touch the handle, the room around me shifted. I stumbled, my body lurching as the hallway I had just passed through warped into something else entirely. It was no longer a hallway, it was an endless void, a space between spaces. The ground below me buckled again, and suddenly I wasn't running anymore. I was falling. Everything went dark. I don't know how long I was unconscious, but when I came to, I found myself lying on cold, damp concrete. My head throbbed. My whole body ached as though I had been crushed under the weight of something massive. I opened my eyes slowly, blinking against the dim light. It wasn't the hallway. It wasn't the room I had been in. The concrete floor stretched out beneath me, cracked and uneven. It smelled like earth, like something ancient had been buried here. I looked around. There was no more house. There were no more walls, no more windows. I was underground. Panic set in. I tried to push myself up, but my limbs felt weak. My body trembled as I stood, my breath shallow, the sense of dread flooding back, heavier than before. Where was I? I glanced around, searching for any sign of escape, but the space was vast. The ceiling arched overhead like the inside of some enormous, hollow shell. I could hear the low hum of something vibrating beneath my feet, deep in the earth. The walls, if they could be called that, were rough, jagged, and blackened. Something had been carved into them, words and symbols that seemed to pulse with a faint, eerie light. And then I saw it, a figure, standing across the vast chamber, still as stone. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its presence, its eyes, somewhere behind the shadows, watching me. I knew without a doubt that it was watching me. I took a step forward, my heart racing, but before I could take another, I heard it, a whisper. You are not meant to be here. I froze, the hairs on my neck standing on end. The voice was distant, but unmistakably close, like the very walls of this place were speaking directly to me. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was rooted in place, the air around me thickening, heavier, my chest constricted. My breath became more difficult, more labored. The thing in the shadows moved, slowly, agonizingly slow. It turned toward me. Its face was covered in a mask of blackened, decayed flesh, stretched tight over its skull, as if it had been shaped into this form over centuries. Its eyes were pitch black, like two pools of oil. It opened its mouth, and the sound that escaped was more than just a whisper. It was the sound of an ancient thing, too old to be alive. You're too late, it said, its voice crackling like the sound of bones breaking. And then, the ground beneath me moved. The walls pressed in, and I could feel it, the house closing around me. I didn't have a chance to scream. I could feel it. The house, no, the thing was surrounding me, pulling me deeper into the void. The walls were no longer just walls. They were alive. They flexed and shifted with the rhythm of some dark, primal heartbeat. The air was thick with an oppressive, suffocating pressure that made every breath a struggle. The figure in front of me took another step, its movements slow, deliberate. Each step seemed to echo in the vast, empty space, resonating with the weight of 1,000 years. The shadowed figure's eyes were still locked on me, its gaze like a physical weight, a suffocating force that seemed to reach into the very core of my being. It was as if it could feel my terror, savoring it. My heart pounded in my chest, but I couldn't move. I tried to take a step, but my legs wouldn't obey. The ground beneath me felt alive. It pulsed with the same rhythm, like it was connected to the creature, the house, and everything in this twisted reality. The symbols carved into the walls began to glow faintly, each one pulsing like the beating of a heart. It spoke again, its voice reverberating through the air, sinking into my bones, colder than ice. You shouldn't have come here. Its words were an ancient warning, a taunt, as if it had been waiting for me. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't just a house. It was a prison, and I had wandered straight into the heart of it, into its deepest, most hidden core. The ground beneath me shifted again. I stumbled, barely catching myself as the earth groaned, and the symbols on the walls flared brighter. There were faces in the shadows now, faces I didn't recognize, faces I shouldn't have seen. They were fused into the walls, their features contorted in expressions of agony. Some were screaming, their mouths frozen open in silent terror. Others were still, their eyes hollow and lifeless, as though their souls had been drained away. And yet, there they were, trapped, still waiting. And then, I felt it, a presence, a rush of air, the sound of something whispering in my ear, close enough that I could feel the cold brush of its breath against my skin. I turned, my heart skipping a beat, my chest tightening in panic. There was another figure. This one was different. It was human, at least. It looked human, though it was distorted in ways I couldn't comprehend. It was a woman, her face pale, her eyes wide and wild, her skin stretched thin over her bones. But what struck me the most was the way she moved. Her limbs jerked and twitched unnaturally, as though they were not her own, as if some force was controlling her from within. "Help me," she whispered, her voice soft and breathless, almost pleading. "Help me, ... before it's too late." I froze. I couldn't respond. I couldn't even move. This place, this realm was twisting everything around me. It wasn't just a house. It wasn't just a physical place. It was alive, a thing of hunger and malice, pulling its prisoners into its depths, never letting them escape. The woman in front of me reached out a hand, her fingers trembling. "You have to help us, before it pulls you in, too." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. This wasn't just about escape anymore. It was about survival, about holding on to whatever was left of me. The walls, the air, the very space I was standing in, they were changing, consuming. The longer I stayed, the more I could feel myself slipping away, as if the house was stealing my will to fight, my mind, my soul. "You're not alone," the woman said again, her voice trembling with desperation. "It's not too late for you to join us, to become part of it." The darkness swirled around her, closing in like a vortex. I couldn't see her anymore, just the emptiness, the vast blackness that had consumed her whole. And then, I saw it. A shadow, so deep and cold that it sucked the warmth out of the air. It was coming from the center of the room, from the floor beneath me. The ground began to crack open again, wider this time, a gap so deep that I couldn't see the bottom. From the darkness, I could feel something rising, something alive, something that had been waiting for me, waiting for the right moment to claim me as its own. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The pressure in my chest intensified, as if the very air was being sucked out of the room. My body felt heavy, drained of all energy. I could feel the ground pulling at my feet, like it was sucking me in, pulling me deeper into the blackness below. "Join us," the woman's voice echoed again, but now it was more of a command than a plea. "Join us in the void. Become part of what we are. Become part of the house." My heart hammered in my chest, but there was nothing I could do to stop it. The house wasn't just holding me. It was consuming me, piece by piece, erasing my will, my identity. I could feel it pulling me in, deeper and deeper, until there was nothing left of me but the darkness. But then, I remembered something. Parker. I saw his face in my mind, his eyes wide with terror, his mouth open in a silent scream. He wasn't gone. He couldn't be. He was still there, somewhere. The thought anchored me, pulling me back from the brink. The house may have been trying to pull me into the void, but I couldn't give in, not without a fight. With a burst of strength, I wrenched my body free from the pull of the darkness. I stumbled backward, falling to the ground, gasping for air as the cold grip loosened just enough for me to move. I didn't know how much longer I could hold on. The shadows were still pressing in on me, trying to swallow me whole. The house wanted me. It had wanted me from the moment I stepped inside, and it was never going to let me go. But I wasn't going to give in, not yet. With everything I had left, I pushed myself to my feet. The ground beneath me still groaned, the air still thick with the presence of the house. But I was still here. I was still alive. And if I was going to escape, I had one last chance. I ran,